that's kind of the deal. It's kind of the deal. And, you know, so I have zero sympathy for him, right, in this regard. Zero sympathy for him. The notion that he can't sell these interests is a bunch of BS, right? Ever since I arrived, the events got downhill. Is this better? No?
Not really.
Oh, it might work. Hello?
Just bad quality. He projects, I think,
Hello? Is that good? All right. Well, first of all, I apologize for being late, but we had a workshop this evening here in Washington County as well, dealing with a very sad topic, the opioid and heroin epidemic that's going on in this country. And it was we had a bunch of very talented experts. We had a panel, we had 17 kind of booths set up from different public health and organizations that are helping families that are dealing with this crisis, mostly staffed by volunteers. It's really heroic what so many people are doing. But the scale of this epidemic and how it's accelerating, they estimate there'll be 2,000 deaths in Maryland in 2016. They don't have the numbers yet finalized, but there were 1,400 through the first 3 quarters. So 2,000 is a reasonable estimate. That's up from like 1,300 the year before. And nationwide, opioid and heroin related overdoses are approaching 75% of the overdoses in this country. And we're really losing control of this, and so much more needs to be done. Fortunately, last year, we passed some legislation in Congress that will put several $billions of funding into the communities for treatment, because this is really a healthcare issue at its core. Dealing with it is a healthcare issue. But preventing it is different. It involves education. It involves an area that I'm working on right now, which is what's happening in the physicians' offices, because they have not been as responsible as a group as they should have been. What's happening in the pharmaceutical companies, because they have been in many ways wholly irresponsible as it relates to what's happened here. They've seen the data, they know the numbers, they know what's happening. And then of course treatment. But it was really powerful because so many mothers who came, who lost children, which is obviously the most unnatural thing to happen to someone in their lives, really gave testimony to their children and what happened to them as a way of contributing to this discussion. So again, I apologize for being late, but it was really a very somber but important discussion. So, but it's great to see so many people here for this town hall. This is the second one we've done this year. I participated in one in Montgomery County with several of my colleagues. Now we're doing one here. We'll be doing more, which is part of my job to hear what you have to say. I'm not going to talk for that long in terms of my opening remarks because this is really about you, and I want to hear what you have to say. You can ask me a question about anything. That doesn't mean I'll be able to answer every question, but you feel free to ask me anything you want. But maybe it kind of to prime the pump, if you will, as it relates to your questions, I would just discuss very briefly how I think about my job as your representative, and that might help focus your questions on different areas. But let me start by saying how grateful I am to be your representative. It's an unbelievable privilege. I've always said we do things in life for 3 reasons, either out of a sense of duty, obligation, or privilege. Serving you in the Congress of the United States, particularly at this moment in time, by the way, I think is very important and is energizing, and it's a great privilege. So I want to thank you for giving me that opportunity. And I really see my job as having 2 specific responsibilities. First and most importantly, and it's also the area where we can really make the biggest difference, is serving you, my constituents, being in service to you. And I'm aided in that work by a terrific group of colleagues. You see many of them around the room here. I'm very blessed. I've been fortunate across my whole career, both in business, which was my prior life, as many of you know, and now in government, to really have the benefit of some wonderful people who work with me. And so I want to also thank them all. If you wouldn't mind giving them working in the district. And to do that, we really do two things. One, we take care of specific matters you may have, and we can be most effective as it relates to dealing with the federal government. So we have the privilege of working with so many veterans who are having issues with the VA, which is a terrible situation, I'm sure we'll talk about that later. And other benefit issues they have, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, whatever the case may be. We help on those matters, we help on immigration matters, we help on a whole variety of matters. And again, I've got a great team to do it. We open up cases, and if anyone's here and has a specific personal matter that they don't want to really ask in a question in front of a big group, feel free to come up to me or any members of my team and talk about that, because that's a big part of what we do. And we also try to bring, as best we can, the government and any resources that are available to me to you. Because I think one of the most powerful things members of Congress can do is convene, like we just did with our opioid workshop. And across the last couple of years, we've had well over 24 workshops on seniors issues, on veterans issues. We've had them on very specific issues like identity theft, particularly on the heels of the massive data breach that occurred with respect to government workers. We've had job fairs. We've got a whole range of issues where we typically get several hundred, in some cases up to 500 people come, and we get experts, we get people to set up booths. And it's one of the great, again, privileges of this job is we have the ability to convene really great resources. So representing you, listening to what you have is a big part of my job, and bringing government to you to make it as smart as possible, which is hard to do sometimes, and really being in service to you is the biggest part of my job. The second part of my job is working in the Congress as part of the federal government to hopefully advance legislation that benefits my district, my state, and my country. And that's the other half of the job. That's the part of the job where you have to delay gratification a little longer because government works slowly, which you appreciate sometimes. Right now I appreciate some of the slow workings of government more than I did in the past as it relates to certain issues. And I'm particularly appreciative of the checks and balances and the institutions we have in our government, which include the press, which I believe always need to be supported as much as possible. We have three branches of government, all of which need our support, all of which need our independence, and then we have the press. I was reminded the other day that when they asked Thomas Jefferson if they gave him a choice, would you rather have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government? He chose the newspapers because he knew that the newspapers were very important for the truth, and nothing good can happen in society without the truth. So my job in government is to advance legislation that benefits you, benefits everyone in the state of Maryland, and everyone in the country. I tend to divide that work into three categories. I work on a lot of economic issues because of my background as an entrepreneur, someone who started 2 businesses in Maryland, created several thousand jobs from scratch. My parents didn't go to college, so I was a real bootstrapped entrepreneur. And I was fortunate to have success in business, and I learned a lot along the way, and I try to bring that to the Congress. And in my judgment, my job in those areas is to do my best to raise the standard of living for every American by making the country and its businesses as competitive as possible, because that's one of the big issues we have in this nation is U.S. competitiveness relative to companies and countries we compete around the world, but also making sure the benefit of that hopefully enhanced competitiveness is spread in a way that's fair in society. And so I spend a lot of time working on economic issues. I've been the lead in a lot of important legislation related to infrastructure and several other categories, where again, I try to bring my experience as a real, honest-to-God entrepreneur who started a business, created several thousand jobs. I'm proud to say my companies were always voted some of the best places to work in the Washington, D.C. area, and I try to bring that perspective to that part of my job. I spend time on matters related to national security and homeland security, which is obviously very important for every citizen of this country. We ask our military to do a lot, and it's important that we fund them and support them at the levels they deserve. After our brave servicemen and women leave their service to the country, they become veterans. I work very hard on supporting veterans. It's one of the great, I often say one of the great privileges of this job is I have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with 2 groups of people, with veterans and with kids, right? And a day doesn't go by that I'm not meeting with either a classroom or a bunch of kids coming to the Hill or for some reason or a group of veterans. But in my work in national security and homeland people, whether they be refugees refugees or just citizens or populations of the globe that are in very difficult situations, particularly women around the world, is an area that I spend a lot of time in. And then the third category is areas that I put under the category of kind of my Catholic Jesuit social justice background. Things that I believe should be made right in society, whether it relates to equality of our citizens. Well, we've made a lot of progress, but we have a long way to go. Whether we relate to environmental stewardship, which I think is an issue of social justice. And most importantly, making sure we're supporting the programs that exist in our government for those that are from time to time left behind by society, right? As someone who does approach my perspective on economic matters as someone who's had experience in the free markets, has experience in the capitalistic form of government we have here, and believes in it, believes that it should be more just, but fundamentally believes in it. But part of believing in it is also understanding and appreciating that from time to time people are left behind by it. And we have a responsibility as citizens to support and take care of those. You can't have one without the other. Making sure we support these programs, whether it be Medicare, whether it be health care, which I do think is a right for every citizen in this country. It's hard for me to imagine in the fullness of time people won't look back and question why people didn't think it was a right. And that's often the way I think people should look at public policy decisions, which is in the fullness of time, in 50 years, you know, maybe it's my religious background, I do believe we'll be judged. And I think elected officials will be judged in some of these issues. Some of these issues that are very obvious in many ways. The world is changing, it's changing rapidly, it's changing because of globalization and technological innovation, and societies are opening up. All of those things are very positive. When I was born 50 years ago, a little over 50 years ago actually, 25% of the world was interconnected, right? 75% of the world lived largely locally in villages and small communities. And the global poverty rate, as measured, the way they measure global poverty is they take a look at a country and the majority of the population lives in poverty. It's considered a nation in poverty. Global poverty rate was 75%. So 25% of the world was interconnected, and 75% of the nations of the world were impoverished. Today, we have the inverse. 80% of the world was interconnected, and the global poverty rate is in the mid-20%. So progress, right? Progress has been made, extraordinary progress. Billions of people have been lifted out of poverty. If that's not the hand of God, I don't know what is. And it's because of, in my opinion, progressive policies, opening up of societies, interconnecting of people through technology, and having a view that we're not isolated and alone in the world, but we're connected. I worry we're going to go back against some of those things, but I actually view those as positive. That doesn't mean they're positive for everyone at every moment in time, right? You cannot take random data points out of a chart and draw conclusions based on them. You have to look at the whole data set. So the whole data set has been positive. But in our country, many people have been left behind and pressured because of these trends. I believe it's our fundamental responsibility as public servants to look out for those people, invest in them, support them. And that's where we failed recently, because these things happened very fast. We weren't quite prepared for them, and we didn't understand them. But guess what? They're continuing to happen. They continue to bring blessings to our country and nations and people all over the world, but not to everyone. And so if you wear a social justice hat, you say, I have some obligation to these people. And I want to do things to invest in them, invest in their future, support them, help them transition, and protect our world that is changing because of this, which includes things from an environmental perspective. So that's how I think about my job. And that is kind of the framing I have for my service to you as your member of Congress. Right now we have a president who's not in my party. People often ask me how I approach it. And I approach it, again, the framing that I use is the same framing I'd use for any president, the same framing I use for President Obama. If the president does good things, I will support those things, good in my judgment. If the president does neutral things, I will work really hard to make them better. I will negotiate to make them better, if you will. And if the president does bad things Things that President Obama had relative to the portfolio of good things that President Trump has put forth so far is very different in my opinion. Right? I view one as abundant and the other as scarce. But, but that's my approach. So I'll conclude with that because I do want to make this about you. I'm sure we have a well thought out system that I had nothing to do with for how we take questions here. That's something about you caught my eye.
I'm originally from West Virginia, southern West Virginia.
We won't hold that.
I know. Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of being a Marylander. And is that right?
You did it with a West Virginia accent, but otherwise it was
I
good.
can't help that part. But I was very proud the day you went to the airport very, very proud to have been one of your supporters the day you went to the airport to see what was happening. What you ran into that day, what was that like?
So it's a very good question. So I went to two airports, Dulles and BWI. Dulles was more relevant because really Dulles Airport, JFK, and Los Angeles Airport are the main airports that receive passengers that could have originated from the countries that were affected by the ban. We went to BWI as well, but it was really happening on the ground in Dulles. And so I'd say several things. And I'll put aside the substance of the policy, which everyone knows from my comments I strongly disagree with. Your question was about what was happening on the ground, which is more related to the process. So, in my opinion, there were two things wrong with this. There was the substance, which I viewed as, and I still view as a religious ban, right? It was a ban of effectively Muslims, which I think is not who we are. We do have freedom of religion in this country, which for a long time many people have cared a lot about. And so I objected to the policy, and I think the courts clearly agreed. But there was also an execution aspect to this. Like most things in life, I used to say this in business, there's strategy and there's execution. Right? So the strategy was this Muslim ban, which I have my objections to, which we've already talked about. And there was the execution. So the global kind of travel industry, as it relates to the equivalent of immigration control, border control, TSA, which every country has like we do, is a vast, complex, interconnected system where the various countries rely extensively on their communication with their counterparts in other countries. That is a very important part of what makes this system work. The fact that they're sharing information, they're collaborating, that our officials know when people board planes in other parts of the world, when they're destined to the United States, they have that information, etc. That system is complicated and it relies on a tremendous amount of collaboration. To the extent you were to make a very significant change, and to me this was common sense, and maybe it's a business person in me, to the extent you were going to make a very significant change to your rules and regulations as it relates to who could come to your country, you would think that you would roll that out with your various counterparts in a way so that there'd be an opportunity to A, understand what you're doing, B, address some of the obvious concerns that would arise based on doing it, and C, potentially learn that maybe there's some things that you missed, right? So that to me would be good management. You'd say, I want to do, putting aside the substance, let's assume what they were doing was a permissible activity. The courts have ruled that it's not, and I don't. Significant, like this it was. Selecting countries, right? Whole countries, and changing your immigration policies or your travel policies or your border policies as it relates to these countries. The right way to do it is to roll it out in a way where you give notice, you talk to your partners, you'd collaborate, and you'd understand. So what was happening in Dulles that day was the fact that that didn't happen. That it was dropped on not only our officials, but all these counterparts around the world, And I actually felt, I felt bad for the border control people of the United States in the airport, because it was clear from looking at them, they didn't know what to do. They were told to now enforce this ban, and they were sitting there in the airport. They got up, when some of them arrived to work as the ban was rolling out, and you could just see them sitting there. They were probably Googling, trying to read stories about like what they're supposed to do. And so they didn't know what to do. We knew there were several members, some Virginia congressmen went there, as well as some other Maryland members. And we wanted access to the people who were being detained. Because, and the very pressing issue at that moment in time is the Virginia court had just ruled that the people had a right to counsel. So we wanted to make sure they were, to their credit, God bless them, there were 100 of immigration lawyers in the airport willing to provide counsel. And we wanted to make sure they were getting access to that counsel. So it was chaotic. It was chaotic, but I think it was very successful. Because I think the one thing we've learned is that democracy, is not a spectator sport. It's a sport we have to participate in. And I think we've realized that a lot can happen in society between elections, right? If people engage. And I think this was, the fact that there was such an outpouring of ranged from outrage to concern to legal experts, their wheels spinning, I think was ultimately very successful in derailing this for the time being. So thank you for the question.
How you doing?
I'm well, sir. How you doing?
Fine. First of all, thank you for what you've done for me personally. As a vet, I'm trying to figure out why is it that the healthcare system for the veterans are still lacking. In addition to a veteran's parent, they're losing their child, they're still paying taxes, you're homeless vets. What's being done as far as the better treatment as veterans are receiving? They're giving their life, they're giving their kids' lives, and they're being treated as second and third class citizens.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your service. I hope you know when we trust directionally, it sounds like you've had experience with us. We obviously care deeply about the veterans. It's one of the great privileges I have as a member of Congress to represent so many veterans and support them. So there's a lot of issues associated with care of the veterans. The one thing I will tell you, and it's probably not fully understood by our citizens or particularly our veterans, there's tremendous support in the Congress on a bipartisan basis to support our veterans. Tremendous support. I sometimes feel like, there's nothing we wouldn't do for our veterans. So again, back to my issue of their strategy and their execution, I think the strategic approach to dealing with our veterans among this nation is to provide enormous support. I think the execution has obviously been really bad. It's been really, really bad. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, like most things in the world changes. Medical conditions change. This recent generation of veterans has a very different healthcare profile than early generations of veterans, related to how combats change, conditions have changed, etc. Obviously, many veterans, and this is a blessing, have been able to survive injuries in situations that in prior conflicts they wouldn't have been able to, right? But that also has resulted in much more complicated kind of physical health conditions for the VA to deal with, but it also is related to very serious mental health issues. And I think the mental health crisis among our veterans is acute, to say the least, if you look at the suicide rates, and a lot more needs to be done. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for hosting. I know this is not like a fun political climate to like just open up a room to right now.
What makes you think that?
So my question is about, you mentioned the opioid crisis, and I'm a person with substance use disorder. I've been abstinent from drugs and alcohol for over 3 years. So this is an issue.
They've known it hasn't correlated to the increase of other related conditions that require pain management, because that should be the correlation. How fast are conditions and diseases growing that normally result in pain management prescription, and have these medicines been growing at the same rate? Well, no, in fact, they've been growing at a much faster rate. Right, so you have to do that. There is a law enforcement aspect to this, obviously. People who are distributing these drugs, dealing these drugs, etc., we need to get them off the street and out of the system for a long period of time, right? They're contributing to the problem. And then, most importantly, the healthcare aspect, which is the treatment. So, we need work in all those areas. Thus far in the Congress, most of what we've done is provided funds against treatment, which is enormously important, but more work needs to be done on it.
Hi, my name is Shannon Delaney. I've been a Washington County resident my whole life, so thank you very much for all the stuff you've been doing for us. But I'm going to ask you a little heavy-handed question. Okay, you ready?
I wish I didn't call on you.
I think you'll have a good answer. So bear with me while I read this small paragraph. So how do you plan on getting Congress to truly put Americans first before party first? Before corrupt greed that is driven by self-interest instead of protecting our citizens? It should not matter what party has the majority when it comes to matters of national security and having qualified candidates to oversee various departments. When is enough enough? It becomes human decency about right and wrong, facts and data versus fiction and fear, legal and illegal. How do you plan on trying to decrease this polarization of party lines before we lose the democracy that so many of our ancestors fought so hard to create? How do we get back on the right path from here?
I'm actually glad I called on you. So have you ever read George Washington's farewell address? Right. It's arguably the best political speech ever given. And he warned of exactly what you described. Right. And arguably the second best farewell address is Eisenhower's, where he warned of something similar. So, look, we have a lot of problems at the center of why our government isn't functioning. But at the center of the center is partisanship, right? Where people put party first over country, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So I'm going to give you a bit of a long-winded answer. So the first thing is I try to lead by example. So I was ranked the third most bipartisan member of the House last year. Which is something I'm very proud of. And I don't feel like I've compromised at all on my values, but I've actually tried to work with people. And part of my approach is, I don't subscribe to the theory that half the country is entirely wrong about everything they believe in. And if you actually listen to the parties, both sides, right, you hear a lot of that. And it's just not true. And if you need any evidence, all you got to do is look at how amazing the country is. I mean, I do believe in an exceptional America. It wouldn't be exceptional if half the population was wrong all the time, right? Because that other half would have to be really doing a good job. So, so what I've tried to do is, there's things I care about. I talked about the things I cared about in my opening, right? Which is growing our economy in a way that allows us to be competitive, but where also those benefits are shared, and so the average American standard of living can go up over time. I care about that. I care about national security, and I care about things that fall under kind of a social justice view of the world. And what I try to do in all those categories is I try to find the best ideas wherever they may reside. Because in fact, I think a lot of great ideas reside on the progressive side of the spectrum. But I think some really good ideas reside on the conservative side of the spectrum. And I've worked a lot of kind of conservatives, like I passed a bill in the House last year and it didn't quite get done in the Senate, but it's going to get done this year, in part because my Republican in the House now is in the Senate. Todd Young from Indiana, and I just talked to him about it last night, and it dealt with something called pay-for-success social impact bonds, which is a new way for government to kind of contract for services that basically creates more responsibility, involves the government only paying for services if metrics are reached, but will in fact open up a lot more resources to be invested in government. And it's really pairing something progressives care about, which is actually putting more resources against problems in society, but doing it in a way that's kind of almost market-based and has kind of a fiscal conservatism at its core. So what we'll end up with, if it works, is we'll get double the money but 4 times the results. Problems we have in the country right now. And Reagan had a good line where he said there are no easy answers, there are simple ones. Right, so there are no easy answers to what's happening economically in this country, because it's largely driven not by our participation in the global economy, which is what the president, I think, policies are based on. I do not think that's the problem. I think the problem is technological innovation combined with globalization. And if you actually are not embrace globalization and go to protectionism and isolation, you'd be much worse off. So to some extent, it's a degrees of problem. It is clearly changing the shape of work in the United States of America and around the world. It is causing the distribution of work in the country used to be relatively not equal, but you had high-skilled, middle-skilled, and low-skilled jobs. Technological innovation and globalization has largely disrupted middle-skilled jobs. So now we create high-skilled and low-skilled jobs. So we've created a lot of jobs, but not a lot of middle-skilled jobs, which is why I think this election was not about jobs, but it was about pay. It was not about jobs. People say it was. For that, it's about pay. And the reason it's about pay is because middle-skilled jobs used to create middle-class pay, and middle-class pay, very simply, was the kind of job you could have, raise a family on, not need a second job, and over time, the pay on that job would go up. Those jobs are going away, and they have low-skilled jobs. Technology has taken all the ability of the labor market to kind of negotiate for better wages out of the system. Because what technology allows companies to do is buy labor on the margin, right? And so that takes away power from labor. And one of the things that's happened, one of the reasons why middle-class men are having such a hard problem is technology has actually allowed corporations to hire a lot of part-time women, right? Because it's just allowed the workforce to be reshaped. So these are very significant structural problems. My view is we need to put demand in the labor market. Demand in the labor market, particularly for jobs that have a middle skill kind of profile to them. Nothing does that better than infrastructure, because it creates two types of middle skill jobs. It creates jobs associated with building the infrastructure, and then it creates jobs, middle skill jobs, associated with supplying the infrastructure builders. And manufacturing, for example, a lot of manufacturing related to infrastructure is done in the United States, principally because a lot of the components are big and heavy, right? So you tend to do that stuff locally. So nothing creates jobs like infrastructure. Plus we need it. We've massively underinvested in our infrastructure. The president's right about that. And the American Society of Civil Engineers does a report every couple of years. Their report's coming out, I think, this Thursday, and they give us a report card. Last time we had a D+, and they said our infrastructure goal was $3 trillion. So that's why I was like, this is the thing we should do. So we came up with a $1 trillion infrastructure program, and we fully paid for it by kind of an old rule of business is you kind of go where the money is. So if you look at the economy, right, domestically and globally, if you look at our budget, right, if you look at our tax revenues, the only place to really find meaningful new money is by fixing our international tax system. So now we're kind of moving to a completely unrelated topic, but it connects, trust me. So U.S. corporations have we have a very odd tax system for their international earnings. They make $100 million in Germany, right? And they're competing with another German coffee company in Germany. And the German tax rate is 20%. So Starbucks makes $100 million in Germany, and they pay $20 million to the German government. And the German coffee company makes $100 million also, and they pay $20 million to the German government. So that's all fair. But if Starbucks wants to bring the $80 million they have left back to the United States, we make them pay up to 35% tax, which is our corporate tax rate. But we also say to them, if you don't want to bring the money back, you don't have to pay that tax. You defer it. So what U.S. companies have been doing, like this example, is they say, well, I'm competing with this company that's paying this 20%, and now I have to pay another 15%. And if I want to expand my operations to Germany, why do I want to send the money back, pay that extra tax, and then have to get the money reinvested in Germany? They just keep the money overseas. So they technically owe the tax and they don't pay it. The problem is not Germany, though. The problem is in tax havens. So when Apple sets up their international operations in Ireland and gets tax haven status, they pay 1% tax to Ireland. And so when they want to bring the money back, they pay 34. They don't bring the money back. So you got $2.5 trillion of that cash sitting overseas from the dynamics I just described. And that's more cash than US corporations have in the United States. And so who are the losers? Well, the losers are the citizens of the United States, because it'd be nice to get that money here because they might do something with it that would create jobs. That's the first problem. The other loser is the US government, because we theoretically are owed all this tax, but we don't get any of it. So we technically are going to get it one day. If they ever bring the money back, we don't get any of it now. And the losers are the companies, because they end up in these convoluted situations where they've got money overseas, and to get, to use it, they got to borrow against it and all this stuff. And then they invert to get rid of the problem. So what I proposed is we fix that system. We take away a company's ability to defer. So we take that part of the tax and we throw it out the window. You now pay your tax when you make it. But, this part you may not like, we cut their rates. And we make it in line with the international competitors. So now Starbucks in Germany, we cut the rate to 20%. They pay 20% to Germany. Their international rate is 20%. And they don't have to pay any additional tax. They bring the money back and forth. But the guys in the tax havens, they have to pay right away too, and they have to pay the minimum. The folks in the tax havens, and the companies doing business in real countries. I'm not trying to say the tax havens are real countries, but let's face it, they're not real countries as it relates to tax. The companies doing business on the ground in Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, places that have real tax rates that are lower than ours, but real, 20% is a real tax, that you make them competitive. That change does several things. First of all, it takes away this incentive to keep your money overseas. So we estimate that half the money will come back. And come back, and they'll do three things with it. They'll buy things with it, right, in the United States. Fine, who cares, right? They can do that. They'll invest in open factories or plants, stuff that's really good for us. Or they'll give it to their shareholders, most of which are US citizens in one form or another, and that's good for the economy. So anything that money does here is better than it being over there. And the other thing that happens is the government generates revenues. So in our proposal, we make these changes, and the government generates 170 billion of revenues based on the changes I've proposed in my bill. We take that 170 billion, and we don't do what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to do, which is to lower tax rates with that money. We take that money and we invest 100% of it in infrastructure. A trust fund. With a advanced education, they actually weren't that different. Part of it is we had a lot more labor unions, right? And jobs paid better. There were more of these middle-class jobs, so people could get these jobs. They were skilled jobs. So it's the most obvious thing to do. Look, the education system needs more money and it needs reforms. Right? It needs both of those things. I'm much more open-minded than most people in my party on education reforms. But I view it in the context of operating from the perspective of a strong public education system. I think they're false choices to say that you can't have a good public education system and you can't put smart reforms in place. And that's something that I'm committed to doing. I've advocated consistently for more money in education. I've advocated consistently for communities that don't have good education systems that we should be supporting charter schools in those communities. Because I think at the end of the day, education is about kids, it's not about adults. And we have to make sure we remind ourselves of that when we're making these decisions. So I'm looking forward to walking to school with you. It'll be a fun day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Hurwitz. I'm a resident of Hagerstown. I also volunteer in the Economic Development Committee for Washington County and the State of Maryland. The Natural Science Foundation has released a major program called the Smart City Program. And it really ties very closely into the opioid addiction issue that we're talking about. And we're working toward putting a group of people together, a group of organizations together to try to launch a very smart cities kind of approach toward the solution to the opioid addiction issue. We recognize that it's a multifaceted problem that crosses many, many different parts of society. And we think that the Smart Cities program will be a good way to do that. And we're looking to your office to maybe give us a little bit of support along the way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm familiar with the initiative. I supported, obviously, the work at the National Science Foundation is, we started the conversation by talking about truth and facts, right? They animate that every day with what they do. I was once told an expression, unless you're God, bring data. And since none of us claim to be a deity, we have to make these decisions based on facts and data. And obviously, the National Science Foundation's work as it relates to smart cities is based on that. So we'd love to collaborate with you on that.
Hi, my name is Gina Woodford, and I live in Sharpsburg. And I'm going to ask you the big question. It's the elephant in the room. Because I know there are people here from both parties, probably. I come from a Democratic background myself. This building that we're in, my father helped to put here. He was one of the very first people on the union charter at Mack Truck. Now, so this building has a lot of, it's special to me. Okay, now the big question is, since we have another president now that is not of your party, and you've said that you have bipartisan leanings that you could go either way depending on how you feel, what is your overview of, with our new president, what do you think you can work with, and what do you think you can't work with?
So, as I said in the beginning, my approach is if the president does good things, I'll support him. If the president does neutral things, meaning they could be good or they could be bad, I'll negotiate and work to make them better. This is all in my judgment, obviously. And if he does bad things, I'll fight. What he's talked about doing that I consider good is what we talked about with the gentleman before, infrastructure and tax reform, two things that I think we need. You know, my sense is that will come out initially as not good in my judgment, but as neutral. That's just my sense, right? I hear the proposals that are going on, and you know, I'm like, the building blocks are there to make something good out of this, but we have to see the details, which we haven't seen any of the details yet. And what I'm worried about is that they've delinked tax reform and infrastructure. And the reason that's important is because infrastructure is a spending program, right? You have to spend money to build the infrastructure. We have a very significant fiscal condition in this country, and we shouldn't sugarcoat that, right? The deficit and debt levels are way too high, and they're growing, and this is a major issue for our children and our grandchildren. And there's a moral aspect to this that is very troubling. It's a whole other discussion around the debt. So I tend to be pretty prudent about things. Now, I like to measure things the way they should be measured. One of the things I'm unique in my party that I'm in favor of is something called dynamic scoring, where you actually don't look at government budgeting the way they do now, which is everything you spend money on is the same and every tax policy basically is the same. But you actually look at the data to say, you know, for example, the best thing the U.S. government spends money on is research. It's been proven over 50 years that we get like a 2.5 times multiplier on every dollar we spend on research. So if you spend $1 billion on research, should you model that it costs $1 billion with no return? No, that's stupid, because we know we get returns on research. We should model the economic impacts of research and factor it in to these decisions. In other words, spending $1 billion on research is not the same as expanding the Department of Labor. That doesn't mean you don't have to expand the Department of Labor, because you may need to, but it doesn't have a return on investment. But right now, since the way infrastructure is scored is an expense, not an investment, which is a mistake, because we know it's a good investment. It improves competitiveness, it improves the efficiency of our citizens, quality of life, all that stuff can translate into economic gains. But we don't do it that way. So in other words, you need to find money to pay for infrastructure. Either that or you increase the debt. The way to find money is tax reform, right? I went through in probably painful detail, for most of you, the whole international tax system. Reforming that system will create money, like I talked about. Everyone's gonna fight for that money. I'm gonna fight to get that money for infrastructure. My colleagues are gonna fight for that money to use it to lower corporate tax rates. If the tax reform occurs first, and then the infrastructure, what are the chances they're gonna save some money for the infrastructure? 0, right? You gotta be in that debate. So I'm pessimistic about their decision to move infrastructure to 2018 and do tax reform now. In my opinion, they should be done together. But I'm open-minded. So that's clearly an area of collaboration. The new president has said, President Trump has said he wants to continue the moonshot project on cancer. For all the reasons I just talked about, I'm a big believer in investing in basic research. I'm a big believer in investing in NIH in particular, because it's good for my state and my district. It's not in my district, but the 6th district has more NIH workers than any other district. We're at a unique time in basic research because there's some very positive things happening. Computing power, big data, and things that have come from the Human Genomes Project, technologies that come from the Human Genomes Project, create an opportunity to really make some transformative progress against diseases that we've only made incremental progress against, like Alzheimer's, autism, this opioid situation. You know, there are research that's being done that could really make a difference against addiction. Rare diseases. The president did a nice job at a State of the Union address talking about a rare disease story that was very compelling. Cancer. So, you know, I would really back up the truck right now on investments in research, because I think we're at a unique time to take some pretty remarkable scientific discovery that's been made in the last decade, and because of tools that up till now were not available, to really translate that discovery into some real healthcare solutions. So if the president, and he said some things positive about that, I'm all in. He talked about paid family leave at the State of the Union. I'm all in on that. So those are some of the areas.
I'm Kathy Hickson, I live here in Hagerstown. All of the issues we've talked about tonight, to me, it seems that the way we look at them is definitely colored by the division of the country. Our country will not be healed into one country until our legislators work together. How can you make it public, the legislators that do work together, so that the population can know that we have legislators that are working for all of us?
Good question. Well, it is. You know, like I said earlier, I was ranked the 3rd most bipartisan member. There's a group called GovTrack that actually is a totally legitimate, nonpartisan, nonprofit that tracks all the votes in Congress. That's what they do. And they do these rankings, and other groups do as well. So there are ways of figuring it out that I would look at. Yeah, but we'll get them to you. We'll start with that. But look, you know, one of the big, let me tell you what concerns, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think we can get through all this, but let me tell you what does concern me. What does concern me, that we've always had partisanship in this country. You fights on the floor of the Congress, all kinds of things. But what was different was that there was generally an agreement on the issue of the day, but then there were different views as to the solutions. That was the framing of partisanship. Yes, this is a problem. Yes, this is an opportunity. We all agree with that, right? And people nod their heads, and then they say, okay, what should we do about it? And then the fight starts. Problem now is there's not an agreement on the issues. There's not an agreement on the issues. And that's the most troubling part, I think, of politics today as it relates to this issue of partisanship. Because it's one thing, I mean, listen, we all agree there's opioid. I think that's the only issue. And the Pew Research just did a study on this where they took the issues of the day and then they went to the different parties. They went to people who identified by party and they asked them how big of an issue they viewed it as. And it was pretty striking because the opioid issue was really the only one where each party agreed to this problem. Because how can you not? But when you go down the list, you know, you look at some big issues and that really divide our society right now, and there's not a lot of agreement. Like, Democrats think there's a whole bunch of problems, And you go to Republicans, and they're like, I don't think that's a problem. Republicans think there's a whole bunch of problems. You go to Democrats, they're like, I don't see that as a problem. And that's, so you're fighting over the issues. And that's concerning. That's concerning. We get you that information. Yes, sir.
The news is very depressing for most of us, particularly when they discuss legislative issues among the parties. And it appears to me that the media thrives on creating or making worse the polarization that occurs by inviting strident members from each party to debate and contradict each other. What can we do to get people like you and your Oklahoma friends from the opposite party to get on the media more and have constructive debates that have some literacy attached to them and really avoid the kind of problems that the fire speaker mentioned to you?
Yeah. Well, look at I agree with you. What sold particularly the last election cycle is ranting and raving, and what didn't sell is kind of moderation and problem solving. And the people who can change that, the media industry is largely controlled by for-profit corporations who look at their bottom line like anyone does, and they know what sells, and they put on what sells until it doesn't sell, and then they put on other stuff. So, I think people should be supporting media that they feel like is actually doing a job delivering real information. But the burden's also in our court. I mean, I think a lot of us feel like we have to be much more aggressive in making sure our voices are heard, right? Because we're like, at this point, you find yourself in a situation where what you had to say, which you think is kind of thoughtful and based on the facts. I mean, who knows, you may be deluding yourself, but that's at least what you think. And you're like, yeah, no one wants to hear it. But now you're like, the country's at stake.
Yeah.
In life, I tell my kids this all the time. In life, we all go to these kind of crossroads, and there's a hard path and an easy path. We all experience this in our lives, right? And when you look back, it's always better to take the hard path. Like, just generally speaking, it's always better to take the hard path. And this is one of these moments where people like myself, who are committed to public service and want to make a difference, you've got to do your part, but I have to do my part. And my part is taking the hard path, right? And making sure things that I want to say and Tom Cole wants to say and other people, where we think we actually have good solutions, that we're actually getting out there and getting in front of people and trying to make it happen. So, I get it.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for hosting the town hall tonight, giving us an opportunity to better get to know you. You say that veterans are one of your main issues. I am the wife of a disabled Afghan veteran of the 82nd Airborne, and as a young veteran who could not be here with us tonight, he wanted me to ask you, what is your stance on our 16-year-long war that we're currently engaged in? That we noticed that it was a topic that was largely not discussed during the elections. And with Vietnam only lasting 7 years, what measures are you going to do to end our current conflicts?
Good question. Look at, I think everyone's frustrated that the withdrawals have taken, longer than they should have. To some extent, there were points in times when they went too fast. I obviously, I shouldn't say obviously because you don't know me, but I was not a supporter of the engagement in the war in Iraq. And I think it was arguably one of the more immoral things we've done as a country. And the cost on our people, and the treasure and the lives of this country have been enormous. So making decisions on something you shouldn't have gotten in, obviously the right decision was not to have done it. And I think we have to support our troops. We have to support the work that has been accomplished over there and make sure it doesn't collapse upon itself. And obviously new conflicts have been created in the wake and the aftermath of what we did over there. And so there's no easy answer to withdrawing our troops other than that's got to be our goal, but it's got to be done in a way that is supportive of them, most importantly, because we can't put the troops that are left there in a bad position and in continued harm's way. They have to be supported. And we have to support the progress that we've made in some of these places. And we have to support the veterans, obviously, like your husband. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amanda Arard, and I'm a constituent living in Frederick. I also want to thank you very much for hosting this. I've learned so much tonight. I had the pleasure of meeting you in your office last April, and at that time you said, I'm not partisan, I'm bipartisan, and I thought that can't be possible. But your bronze medal ranking proves
I like that bronze medal.
proves you to be, so I learned just truly how bipartisan you are tonight. Also learned how much your business background really applies to the job you do at representing us and proposing policies like you explained. So I'm leaving tonight feeling so much more confident. I already was confident in my support of you, but even more so in how well you're representing us. There's one area that I need to know, which is given how well you apply your business background to your job, how will you hold your fellow so-called businessmen in the White House and his supporters? And by the way, I'm very concerned at the number of people in the other party who claim to not support him now falling in line. And so how will you hold them accountable? Thank you.
Well, again, back to my original framing, when the president does things that are bad, I'll fight and I'll push my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to step up. Quite frankly, I've been disappointed in many of them because they're not on issues that are important. I called, for example, for the Attorney General to resign today. And it was pretty clear to me when you replayed his Senate testimony, which I did, where he volunteered information, that information was clearly misleading by any measure, likely intentionally misleading. And it was misleading about a fact that is probably in the eyes of most Americans. If you go to Democrats and you ask them the biggest concern they have with the president, there'll be a long list, obviously. But this would be the top of the list, because it really gets to the democracy and the values and the independence of the president. I think if you go to Republicans, and there have been polls on this, and you say, for those of you who support the president, and most of his voters still support him, and you ask them the issue that concerns them the most, this is the issue that concerns them the most. So even among the president's supporters, this is an area of significant concern. So I think right now in the United States of America, again, there's a lot of issues at the center of kind of political debate, et cetera. This is at the center of the center. And the Attorney General intentionally misled his colleagues in the Senate about this issue, right? He didn't mislead him about paying someone who worked in his house, like the gentleman for OMB who I served with, Mr. Mulvaney. We could have an interesting debate as to whether misleading about that should disqualify someone once they've been confirmed. And I think most people would probably say, yeah, it probably should. But when you mislead about an issue that is really the number one issue that the people of the country are really concerned about, and it's getting to the trust and credibility of the administration, I think that clearly merits a resignation for the good of the country. And I'm going to push my colleagues to take the same position.
Hi, my name is Vanilla, and we have been living in the state for the last 30 years, and I've been working for your campaign with my daughter and with my son 2 times, so we are really happy to be here, and we're glad you made it through.
You sure your son is happy to be here?
Yeah, he woke up 6 o'clock, so he's ready for his bed.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, but we have to bring him here to know that we work for. So I
If
really.
I were you, I wouldn't be happy to be here.
I really appreciate that you went to the airport and supported the migrants and all those people, and my family member was at the airport as well. But unfortunately, he couldn't make it through all the way in the country. He was holding a green card, and he has to sign the paper and go back home because he cannot enter.
He had a green card,
Yes, he did.
so this is one of the examples.
Yes, and now my problem is this, I really want my parents to come in, and they are a green card holder, but they both are afraid to come into the country.
Yeah.
So what plan do you have for them, people like them who could come back?
Well, with the green card, they can come now, and they should, if they want to come, because you never know.
If they send them back from the airport, what?
Well, but right, the courts have ruled on this issue, so you should, if they have a green card. I mean, look at what I said earlier about, look, I disagree with the substance of this bill, but the way they implemented this was so kind of amateur hour. Like, it made me question whether there was actually anyone in the White House with a law degree from an accredited law school. Because if you've taken a class in constitutional law, right, you know that a green card holder has legal residency status, and you would immediately say, you can't do that. Like, you can't, take that out and let's start again. And then we'll see if we can do the other things. But that would be like right away, not even close. So, I don't know. I would tell them to come now.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll send you a
John?
message.
Where's the, right, okay.
John, I was wondering, given all these things swirling about Russia and, the present administration, one of the core issues here seems to be still Donald Trump's tax returns. And I'm wondering I know you talk to a lot of people on the other side of the aisle, probably more than most. Is there any possibility that there's any way to actually get them, this gets to the trust about government and trust.
Yes.
We have to have facts, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, to start with, when you're in business or anything, is there any truth to the fact that law from the 20s, build a teapot dome or something, could force him to actually give us the information that I think we have the right to know?
Yeah, the Ways and Means Committee of the House could get this information. They're just not doing it. So listen, I clearly call for the release of tax returns. I think the expectation of anyone running for president of the United States is that they'll release their tax returns. Like, you don't have to release your tax returns in this country, obviously, but you also don't have to run for president, right? I mean, there's just a basic expectation. And I didn't go back and look at this, but I seem to recall him saying he was going to release his tax returns in August. Like, that's an issue that I also, not that it would matter, but I thought there was a representation that he was going to, clearly he should release his tax returns. Clearly, he should release his. With a advanced education, they actually weren't that different. Part of it is we had a lot more labor unions, right? And jobs paid better. There were more of these middle-class jobs, so people could get these jobs. They were skilled jobs. So it's the most obvious thing to do. Look, the education system needs more money and it needs reforms. Right? It needs both of those things. I'm much more open-minded than most people in my party around education reforms. But I view it in the context of operating from the perspective of a strong public education system. I think they're false choices to say that you can't have a good public education system and you can't put smart reforms in place. And that's something that I'm committed to doing. I've advocated consistently for more money in education. I've advocated consistently for communities that don't have good education systems that we should be supporting charter schools in those communities. Because I think at the end of the day, education is about kids, it's not about adults. And we have to make sure we remind ourselves of that when we're making these decisions. So I'm looking forward to walking to school with you. It'll be a fun day. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Hurwitz. I'm a resident of Hagerstown. I also volunteer in the Economic Development Committee for Washington County and State of Maryland. The National Science Foundation has released a major program called the Smart City Program. And it really ties very closely into the opioid addiction issue that we're talking about. And we're working toward putting a group of people together, a group of organizations together to try to launch a very smart cities kind of approach toward the solution to the opioid addiction issue. We recognize that it's a multifaceted problem that crosses many, many different parts of society. And we think that the Smart City program will be a good way to do that. And we're looking to your office to maybe give us a little bit of support along the way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with the initiative. I supported, obviously, the work at the National Science Foundation. Is we started the conversation by talking about truth and facts, right? They animate that every day with what they do. I was once told an expression, unless you're God, bring data. And since none of us claim to be a deity, we have to make these decisions based on facts and data. And obviously the National Science Foundation's work as it relates to smart cities is based on that. So we'd love to collaborate with you on that. Okay.
Hi, my name is Gina Woodford, and I live in Sharpsburg. And I'm going to ask you the big question. It's the elephant in the room. Because I know there are people here from both parties probably. I come from a Democratic background myself. This building that we're in, my father helped to put here. He was one of the very first people on the union charter at Mack Truck. Now, so this building has a lot of, it's special to me. Okay, now the big question is, since we have another president now that is not a good party, and you've said that you have bipartisan leanings that you could go either way depending on how you feel. What is your overview of, with our new president, what do you think you can work with, and what do you think you can't work with?
So, as I said in the beginning, my approach is if the president does good things, I'll support him. If the president does neutral things, meaning they could be good or they could be bad, I'll negotiate and work to make them better. This is all in my judgment, obviously. And if he does bad things, I'll fight. What he's talked about doing that I consider good is what we talked about with the gentleman before, infrastructure and tax reform, two things that I think we need. My sense is that will come out initially as not good in my judgment, but as neutral. That's just my sense, right? I hear the proposals that are going on, and I'm like, the building blocks are there to make something good out of this, but we have to see the details, which we haven't seen any of the details yet. And what I'm worried about is that they've delinked tax reform and infrastructure. And the reason that's important is because infrastructure is a spending program, right? You have to spend money to build the infrastructure. We have a very significant fiscal condition in this country, and we shouldn't sugarcoat that, right? The deficit and debt levels are way too high, and they're growing, and this is a major issue for our children and our grandchildren. And there's a moral aspect to this that is very troubling. That's a whole other discussion around the debt. So I tend to be pretty prudent about things. Now, I like to measure things the way they should be measured. One of the things I'm unique in my party that I'm in favor of is something called dynamic scoring, where you actually don't look at government budgeting the way they do now, which is everything you spend money on is the same and every tax policy basically is the same. But you actually look at the data to say, for example, the best thing the U.S. government spends money on is research. It's been proven over 50 years that we get like a 2.5 times multiplier on every dollar we spend on research. So if you spend $1 billion on research, should you model that it costs $1 billion with no return? No, that's stupid, because we know we get returns on research. We should model the economic impacts of research and factor it in to these decisions. In other words, spending $1 billion on research is not the same as expanding the Department of Labor. That doesn't mean you don't have to expand the Department of Labor, because you may need to, but it doesn't have a return on investment. But right now, since the way infrastructure is scored is an expense, not an investment, which is a mistake, because we know it's a good investment. It improves competitiveness, it improves the efficiency of our citizens, quality of life, all that stuff can translate into economic gains. But we don't do it that way. So in other words, you need to find money to pay for infrastructure. Either that or you increase the debt. The way to find money is tax reform, right? I went through in probably painful detail, for most of you, the whole international tax system. Reforming that system will create money, like I talked about. Everyone's going to fight for that money. I'm going to fight to get that money for infrastructure. My colleagues are going to fight for that money to use it to lower corporate tax rates. If the tax reform occurs first, and then the infrastructure, what are the chances they're going to save some money for the infrastructure? 0, right? You got to be in that debate. So I'm pessimistic about their decision to move infrastructure to 2018 and do tax reform now. In my opinion, they should be done together. But I'm open-minded. So that's clearly an area of collaboration. The new president has said, President Trump has said he wants to continue the moonshot project on cancer. For all the reasons I just talked about, I'm a big believer in investing in basic research. I'm a big believer in investing in NIH in particular, because it's good for my state and my district. It's not in my district, but the 6th district has more NIH workers than any other district. We're at a unique time in basic research because there's some very positive things happening. Computing power, big data, and things that have come from the Human Genomes Project, technologies that come from the Human Genomes Project, create an opportunity to really make some transformative progress against diseases that we've only made incremental progress against, like Alzheimer's, autism, this opioid situation. You know, there are research that's being done that could really make a difference against addiction. Rare diseases. The president did a nice job at a State of the Union address talking about a rare disease story that was very compelling. Cancer. So, you know, I would really back up the truck right now on investments in research, because I think we're at a unique time to take some pretty remarkable scientific discovery that's been made in the last decade, and because of tools that up till now were not available, to really translate that discovery into some real healthcare solutions. So if the president, and he said some things positive about that, I'm all in. He talked about paid family leave at the State of the Union. I'm all in on that. So those are some of the areas.
I'm Kathy Hickson, I live here in Hagerstown. All of the issues we've talked about tonight, to me, it seems that the way we look at them is definitely colored by the division of the country. Our country would not be healed into one country until our legislators work together. How can you make it public, the legislators that do work together, so that the population can know that we have legislators that are working for all of us?
Good question. Well, it is. You know, like I said earlier, I was ranked the 3rd most bipartisan member. There's a group called GovTrack that actually is a totally legitimate, nonpartisan, nonprofit that tracks all the votes in Congress. That's what they do. And they do these rankings, and other groups do as well. So there are ways of figuring it out that I would look at. Yeah, but we'll get them to you. We'll start with that. But look, you know, one of the big, let me tell you what concerns, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think we can get through all this, but let me tell you what does concern me. What does concern me, that we've always had partisanship in this country. You fights on the floor of the Congress, all kinds of things. But what was different was that there was generally an agreement on the issue of the day, but then there were different views as to the solutions. That was the framing of partisanship. yes, this is a problem, yes, this is an opportunity. We all agree with that, right? And people nod their heads, and then they say, okay, what should we do about it? And then the fight starts. Problem now is there's not an agreement on the issues. There's not an agreement on the issues. And that's the most troubling part, I think, of politics today as it relates to this issue of partisanship. Because it's one thing, I mean, listen, we all agree there's opioid. I think that's the only issue. And the Pew Research just did a study on this where they took the issues of the day and then they went to the different parties. They went to people who identified by party and they asked them how big of an issue they viewed it as. And it was pretty striking because the opioid issue was really the only one where each party agreed that this is a problem. How can you not? But when you go down the list, you look at some big issues and that really divide our society right now, and there's not a lot of agreement. Like, Democrats think there's a whole bunch of problems, and you go to Republicans, and they're like, I don't think that's a problem. Republicans think there's a whole bunch of problems, you go to Democrats, they're like, I don't see that as a problem. And that's, so you're fighting over the issues, and that's concerning. That's concerning. We get you that information. Yes, sir.
The news is very depressing for most of us, particularly when they discuss legislative issues among the parties. And it appears to me that the media thrives on creating or making worse the polarization that occurs by inviting strident members from each party to debate and contradict each other. What can we do to get people like you and your Oklahoma friends from the opposite party to get on the media more and have constructive debates that have some literacy attached to them and really avoid the kind of problems the fire speaker mentioned to you?
Yeah. Well, look at I agree with you. What sold particularly the last election cycle is ranting and raving, and what didn't sell is kind of moderation and problem solving. And the people who can change that, the media industry is largely controlled by for-profit corporations who look at their bottom line like anyone does. And they know what sells, and they put on what sells until it doesn't sell, and then they put on other stuff. So, I think people should be supporting media that they feel like is actually doing a job delivering real information. But the burden's also in our court. I mean, I think a lot of us feel like we have to be much more aggressive in making sure our voices are heard, right? Because we're like, at this point, you find yourself in a situation where what you had to say, which you think is kind of thoughtful and based on the facts. I mean, who knows, you may be deluding yourself, but that's at least what you think. And you're like, yeah, no one wants to hear it. But now you're like, the country's at stake.
Yeah.
In life, I tell my kids this all the time. In life, we all go to these kind of crossroads, and there's a hard path and an easy path. We all experience this in our lives, right? And when you look back, it's always better to take the hard path. Like, just generally speaking, it's always better to take the hard path. And this is one of these moments where people like myself, who are committed to public service and want to make a difference, you've got to do your part, but I have to do my part. And my part is taking the hard path. Right? And making sure things that I want to say and Tom Cole wants to say and other people, where we think we actually have good solutions, that we're actually getting out there and getting in front of people and trying to make it happen. So, I get it.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for hosting the town hall tonight, giving us an opportunity to better get to know you. You say that veterans are one of your main issues. I am the wife of a disabled Afghan veteran of the 82nd Airborne, and as a young veteran who could not be here with us tonight, he wanted me to ask you, what is your stance on our 16-year-long war that we're currently engaged in? That we noticed that it was a topic that was largely not discussed during the elections, and with Vietnam only lasting 7 years, what measures are you going to do to end our current conflicts?
Good question. Look at, I think everyone's frustrated that the withdrawals have taken longer than they should have. To some extent, there were points in times when they went too fast. I obviously, I shouldn't say obviously because you don't know me, but I was not a supporter of the engagement in the war in Iraq. And I think it was arguably one of the more immoral things we've done as a country. And the cost on our people, and the treasure and the lives of this country have been enormous. So making decisions on something you shouldn't have gotten in, obviously the right decision was not to have done it. And I think we have to support our troops. We have to support the work that has been accomplished over there and make sure it doesn't collapse upon itself. And obviously new conflicts have been created in the wake and the aftermath of what we did over there. And so there's no easy answer to withdrawing our troops other than that's got to be our goal, but it's got to be done in a way that is supportive of them, most importantly, because we can't put the troops that are left there in a bad position and in continued harm's way. They have to be supported. And we have to support the progress that we've made in some of these places. And we have to support the veterans, obviously, like your husband. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amanda Rudd, and I'm a constituent living in Frederick. I also want to thank you very much for hosting this. I learned so much tonight. I had the pleasure of meeting you in your office last April, and at that time you said, I'm not partisan, I'm bipartisan, and I thought that can't be possible. But your bronze medal ranking proves...
I like that bronze medal.
Proves you to be, so I learned just truly how bipartisan you are tonight. Also learned how much your business background really applies to the job you do at representing us and proposing policies like you explained. So I'm leaving tonight feeling so much more confident. I already was confident in my support of you, but even more so in how well you're representing us. There's one area that I need to know, which is given how well you apply your business background to your job, how will you hold your fellow so-called businessmen in the White House and his supporters? And by the way, I'm very concerned at the number of people in the other party who claim to not support him now falling in line. And so how will you hold them accountable? Thank you.
Well, again, back to my original framing, when the president does things that are bad, I'll fight and I'll push my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to step up. Quite frankly, I've been disappointed in many of them because they're not on issues that are important. I called, for example, for the Attorney General to resign today. And it was pretty clear to me when you replayed his Senate testimony, which I did, where he volunteered information, that information was clearly misleading by any measure, likely intentionally misleading. And it was misleading about a fact that is probably in the eyes of most Americans. If you go to Democrats and you ask them the biggest concern they have with the president, there'll be a long list, obviously. But this would be the top of the list because it really gets to the democracy and the values and the independence of the president. I think if you go to Republicans, and there have been polls on this, and you say, for those of you who support the president, and most of his voters still support him, and you ask them the issue that concerns them the most, this is the issue that concerns them the most. So even among the president's supporters, this is an area of significant concern. So I think right now in the United States of America, again, there's a lot of issues at the center of kind of political debate, et cetera. This is at the center of the center. And the Attorney General intentionally misled his colleagues in the Senate about this issue, right? He didn't mislead him about paying someone who worked in his house, like the the gentleman for OMB who I served with, Mr. Mulvaney. Like, we could have an interesting debate as to whether misleading about that should disqualify someone once they've been confirmed. And I think most people would probably say, yeah, it probably should. But when you mislead about an issue that is really the number one issue that the people of the country are really concerned about, and it's getting to the trust and credibility of the administration, I think that clearly merits a resignation for the good of the country. And I'm going to push my colleagues to take the same position.
Hi, my name is Vanilla, and we have been living in state for the last 30 years, and I've been working for your campaign with my daughter and with my son 2 times, so we are really happy to be here, and we're glad you made it through.
You sure your son is happy to be here?
Yeah, he woke up 6 o'clock, so he's ready for his bed.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, but we have to bring him here to know that we work for. So I really.
If I were you, I wouldn't be happy to be here.
I really appreciate that you went to the airport and supported the migrants and all those people, and my family member was at the airport as well. But unfortunately, he couldn't make it through all the way in the country. He was holding a green card, and he has to sign the paper and go back home because he cannot enter.
He had a green card.
Yes, he did.
So this is one of the examples.
Yes, and now my problem is this, I really want my parents to come in, and they are a green card holder, but they both are afraid to come into the country.
Yeah.
So what plan do you have for them, people like them who could come back?
Well, with the green card, they can come now, and they should, if they want to come, because you never know.
If they send them back from the airport, what?
Well, but right, the courts have ruled on this issue. So you should, if they have a green card. I mean, look at what I said earlier about, look, I disagree with the substance of this bill, but the way they implemented this was so kind of amateur hour. Like, it made me question whether there was actually anyone in the White House with a law degree from an accredited law school. Because if you've taken a class in constitutional law, right, you know that a green card holder has legal residency status, and you would immediately say, you can't do that. Like, you can't, take that out and let's start again. And then we'll see if we can do the other things. But that would be like right away, not even close. So, I don't know. I would tell them to come now.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll send you a
John?
message.
Where's the, right, okay.
John, I was wondering, given all these things swirling about Russia and, the present administration, one of the core issues here seems to be still Donald Trump's tax returns. And I'm wondering is, I know you talk to a lot of people on the other side of the aisle, probably more than most. Is there any possibility that there's any way to actually get them, this gets to the trust about government and trust.
Yes.
We have to have facts, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, to start with, when you're in business or anything, is there any truth to the fact that that law from the 20s, build a teapot dome or something, could force him to actually give us the information that I think we have the right to know?
Yeah, the Ways and Means Committee of the House could get this information. They're just not doing it. So listen, I clearly call for them to release his tax returns. I think the expectation of anyone running for president of the United States is that they'll release their tax returns. Like, you don't have to release your tax returns in this country, obviously, but you also don't have to run for president, right? I mean, there's just a basic expectation. And I didn't go back and look at this, but I seem to recall him saying he was going to release his tax returns in August. Like, that's an issue that I mean, not that it would matter, but I thought there was a representation that he was going to, clearly he should release his tax returns. Clearly. he should release his. I think he will not do it voluntarily.
Can legislation be passed to make him?
Yes, but not in Congress where my Republican. Into the good part of reading.
I'm always writing letters, I'm.
There have been many important votes that I've gone back and forth a lot in my mind as I've led up to the vote about which way I was going to go, constantly listening to constituents, constantly listening to experts, talking to people. And so the voice of my constituents really matter in those decisions. Because at the end of the day, I'm your only representative. I'm the only one, right? So if I'm not listening to you, no one's really listening to you. And so I really do take seriously the feedback we get from my constituents on issues. And so that part is valuable to us, it really is. I think we can probably do a better job engaging you on advocacy on some of the things we're working on, and we should probably think about that. So that's a good suggestion. I'm going to take you up on your offer.
Hi, my name is Ellen. I live in Frederick County, and I have kind of a two-parter.
You're sitting next to the last two-parter.
I know.
Just because it went well for her doesn't mean it's going to go so well for you.
No, she's my ride, so it has to.
What's that?
She's my ride.
Okay.
So, you take care of her, I get to
I
take
guess,
care of
okay.
her.
All right.
Do you support?
What?
You can give her a ride, you're going that way.
You can give her a ride.
Do you support medical marijuana storefronts? And I happen to know, because my son received, his company is now on track to open the storefront in Columbia, Maryland. I know Hagerstown has a group as well. I know Hagerstown is getting one. What is your support of that, and where is all that money going to go? It kicks off a tremendous amount of tax money.
It does. Well, I do support medical marijuana. I haven't thought about the storefront issue, to be honest with you.
You're supposed to get one.
What's that?
You're supposed to get one. Hagerstown.
Yeah, I thought it was me personally. A little thing on the side, maybe. Right? Yeah, right. Now what's in vogue is elected officials running all kinds of businesses on the side. So why not jump right in to a super controversial one? I haven't really thought about the storefront issue. I mean, I support medical marijuana, so I don't see why I wouldn't support a storefront, right? Because I don't support it just in a back alley. The tax dollars, well, I don't get any of it, the state uses it all. It's up to this is the one to bug your state legislature, and I can give you all their numbers. What's the second part of your question?
Will you go and try to get that money for your town, for your district?
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's local taxes on the medical marijuana.
There is.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, some of these things, I'm totally comfortable saying I don't know the answer to some of these questions. And I don't know about the local taxing on medical marijuana. I mean, we can get you that answer. I don't know if anyone on my team, anyone know the answer to this question? No, you stumped us. Should have let you just have one question. That was my mistake.
Hi, my name is Brian, and I'm from Hagerstown.
Hey, Brian.
I have a daughter that's about to turn 3 next month.
Congratulations.
And, thank you. And I'm a young father, and one of the things that I want for my daughter is to have, with Governor O'Malley and Baltimore City, that minimum wage should be $15 an hour, or how would you deal with this issue? Because unfortunately, families struggle to make ends meet, and I really want to keep my daughter in the state of Maryland,
Right.
where cost of living unfortunately is higher than neighboring states as well.
So, look at it, I think moving the minimum wage up on a regular basis is incredibly important. I was the first statewide, I was the first federal or statewide official to actually call for Maryland to raise its minimum wage when we did it a few years ago, and we actually worked and helped fund the grassroots advocacy group. I forgot what it is. Does any of the team members remember what it was called? That helped really kind of helped to get that passed. So I was kind of on the forefront last time we raised the minimum wage in Maryland. Look at what we've done with the minimum wage is ridiculous. It should be indexed, right? The problem, one of the problems with our minimum wage is because it's not indexed, you get into this situation where it doesn't get raised for a long time, and people get hurt, and then a lot of pressure gets created to raise it, and then it gets raised in a big jump, and that has negative effects because it's too big a bite for oftentimes small businesses to absorb. All that would be irrelevant if we just raise this every year with inflation, which is what I'm in favor of. I don't have any problem. Look, the thing about minimum wage, like, there's an economic effect, right? You raise the minimum wage, you help people. You help them directly. You actually help a lot of businesses because there's a correlation between more money in people's pocket. A lot of businesses who actually hire minimum wage workers, a lot of their customers are minimum wage workers. And it has a trickle-up effect in the whole kind of pay ladder, because if someone's even $5 above minimum wage, or they raise minimum wage, they expect to go up as well, right? Because they're focusing on the amount they have above minimum wage, not just their absolute pay. You know, but there is a point where the argument gets too high. I mean, we all know that $100 minimum wage is too high, right? And we all know that what we have today on a federal level is too low. I tend to think the best way to think about minimum wage is to have a federal minimum, and then locally, depending upon the dynamics in your market, you make adjustments. And what you factor into those adjustments is cost of living in your jurisdiction, and whether there are inherent barriers in your jurisdiction that make it so that, you know, jobs don't leave. So the best, so I think it's very market specific.
That's done in the government.
What's that?
That's done within the government. I worked for the National Park
Yeah.
Service, and if you worked in certain areas, you gotta boost.
Absolutely.
because
Well,
of
it's
the
obvious.
cost of living.
Right, it's obvious, right?
That's.
Yeah.
Hi, Congressman. Ronald Dixon, District Editor for Maryland Fathers' Rights Movement and Fathers' Rights Movement for for Frederick County.
Yep.
I wanted to talk with you a little bit about what my followers and constituents consider a crisis of epidemic proportions, not only here in the state of Maryland, but across the country. And I have a couple questions for you, but I'd like to share.
If you could do one question, because we're getting kicked out of here at 10. I always want to announce there's one more question. So there's one more question here for you. So if you would give us one question, then we can follow up
I
later.
want to share a little bit of information with you. And touches on what the willing to support a 50-50 parenting bill legislation nationally for family law. Instead of there being an incentive to separate children, it will be a system to help keep families together. And
Well, listen, I think what's happened in marriage, the short answer is I can't say I'm going to support something that I'm not all that familiar with, which is what, I'm familiar with the trends you're talking about, but not obviously familiar with what you're talking about in the bill. I do think what's happened to the institution of marriage in this country is an enormous problem. And if you look, and it's really an income disparity issue, because the institution of marriage among well-educated, well-off Americans has never been stronger. The institution of marriage among people who do not have a degree past a high school degree has never been weaker. And as if income inequality wasn't a big enough issue, you get this issue as it relates to the family structure that is just extraordinarily debilitating in our society right now. And, you know, so it's I've been very concerned about that big issue of what's happened to marriage in this country, because I do think it's a stabilizing force for children and for communities. So let's do a follow-up meeting on that. Last question, where's the mic?
Thank you, Congressman, for making this.
I don't make this.